Alrighty, welcome everyone to WorkSmart Live. That's a wrap. I'm Dawn Church. I'm WorkSmart's events manager. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, a big thank you to our friends over at the Durham Chamber of Commerce for continuing to partner with us on this series. And it's a very happy, sad day because today is the last episode in the Back to the Future series. And I know you're super heartbroken. We are too. Marissa and I have been, crying all day. Redo makeup 20,000 times. But it's all good because all good things must come to an end so that new great things can start. And there's always lots of really good new things happening and brewing here at WorkSmart. That's a little bit of a pun hint that you might remember later. But before we get to the good new things, let's recap and wrap this series. So we've talked about a ton of really great stuff in this series. We've talked about virtual reality and services like Azure Active Directory and Intune for managing your users. We've talked about communicating in the cloud and breaking up with email, which is probably one of my favorite things we've talked about. We've talked about file storage and backups and cybersecurity. And last week we learned how to be phish-proof. And of course, we've talked about Microsoft Teams for everyday people twice. And we've had some really fun guest stars, right? Like Dan and Jay from Viking Mergers and Acquisitions, and the fabulous Becky Jacobs, the CEO of Simple Change, to talk about kind of the soft skills of communicating with remote teams. And that's a lot of really good stuff. And if you missed any of that, we're absolutely happy to send you the recordings if you want to send me an email after this call. So today we're going to wrap and recap all of that and talk about even more regarding the future of business and the modern workplace. And of course, I can't do all that myself because that would be a lot. So we have two fabulous people here today to help us out. First off, we have Marissa Wayman, WorkSmart's marketing manager. Hello, Marissa. She is our amazing co-pilot extraordinaire who you've probably seen a lot of over the last several weeks if you've been joining us on the regular. And then we have Clay Harris, WorkSmart's president and COO, sorry. You'd think I would know that because Clay's my boss and good friend. So Marissa, I'm gonna pass this off to you. I believe you have a lot of questions for Clay and you can take it from here.
Take it away, yes, gladly. And as Doug mentioned, you've heard a lot from me over the last 12 weeks. So today you're going to hear some from me, but in the form of questions because Clay has joined us to do most of the sharing today. And as Dawn mentioned, we've talked a lot about the tools and the strategy to help teamwork and productivity, even when we aren't together. So those keys to making it easy to connect with one another while we're keeping our organization's data secure. And Clay, you're here for your two perspectives, one as a small business owner and the other as a CEO of an IT consulting firm. Plus, you also help out a lot with ticket intake and answering calls when the help desk needs an extra hand. So I think with that, plus your experience, is important. It's important for us to share what we know is working for small businesses in a modern workplace. And if you remember, about 13 weeks ago, you joined us for the WorkSmart Live Remote Office Series finale. And we discussed forward-looking strategies because although our small business clients would love to go back to normal, we realized at that time that it would probably be a long time before we went back to that normal, if ever. And so we talked about the importance of having the right plan, the right tools, policies, training, and practice built into an agile organization, which leads me to say that this year we won our second Best Places to Work award. A little round of applause for us there. Or I guess a little pat on the back would be more appropriate. But we won our second after winning our first in 2019. This year, the survey to pull data from our team went out during the pandemic. And aside from having people we know you're going to love Can you share with us, we'll get started by having you share with us what helped maintain our team's health through that chaotic time?
Sure. Well, you mentioned having people you're going to love, and that's not an aside, right? So I guess the first thing is that we just have a bunch of great team members here at WorkSmart, and so that's probably a combination of luck and getting better at recruiting over time. But we really do have a bunch of great people, and so that's first and foremost kind of the thing that drives our success at WorkSmart. But the reason that we've been able to bring those people in is because we're really clear both on our intent here, right? Like what we're trying to do, which is to help our team members and our clients reach their full potential. So we have a kind of a solid foundation around our purpose, and then we have a solid process around how we go about it, right? Whether it's how we run meetings or how we talk about the business to the technologies we use, and making sure that we're using the right stuff, not just more technology. We use the right technology, not more technology. And so kind of that combination, great people, clear intent, and the right tools makes it pretty simple, right? It's a pretty simple equation ultimately.
Yeah, and the tools is an important piece when you're talking about a traditionally in-office team like WorkSmart and like many of the small business clients that we have. Those meaningful personal connections, they required more intention. And we talked about that at the end of the last series as well. In what ways did you feel like technology helped us maintain those personal connections, even though we were physically apart?
Sure. So, we're doing more video calls, right? So staff meetings shifted from in-person to on Microsoft Teams, where we can see people and interact with people. Our use of Teams kind of ratcheted up so that we could do more collaboration and with one another and talk to each other in real time as needed. We also use technology to foster two-way communication, right? A lot of times when people hear a leader talk about communication, they think about how to get the message out, how to make sure that everybody on the team knows how the company is doing, and that's important. But also you want it to come the other way too. And so we use a separate tool, a pulsing kind of survey tool that I think a lot of companies are using now to kind of ask good questions, not just the ones that get thrown in by the system, but to ask really specific questions about the organization so that we can make sure to understand our employees' needs. So we're trying to use technology and tools and technology to make those other things actually come to life, right? And there's no more chatting at the coffee station, right? To be able to build those personal connections. So you have to figure out ways to have technology enable those things. And while it's not the same, we found it to be effective. And so we want to do two things. One, clearly communicate to folks so they know what to expect into the future, but also hear back from them, right? Because anyway, but Dawn has also spearheaded lots of virtual team engagements to keep our folks connected too, in ways that are fun for them. Dawn, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So you all probably know at this point I'm WorkSmart's events manager, and I do a lot of client stuff, but the other half of my job is staff events. And that was a real interesting challenge, trying to shift all of that onto a virtual environment overnight. But some fun things that we've had that have been really simple is that we actually created a channel on Teams for social connection. It's called the Social Circuit. And Clay posts birthdays in there, and then a few other things. But we as individuals share pictures of our kids and our pets throughout the day, and the view from our home office. And every once in a while somebody will get on there and be like, hey, what's your playlist for today? And we've actually created a playlist for the team out of that, which has been a lot of fun. And then we have an ongoing every other week virtual happy hour and a monthly virtual lunch together. We have still done some stuff that's actually not necessarily been in person, but where we've involved some like physical exchange. We've mailed, this was like in April, but we mailed s'mores kits to everybody and had a virtual campfire, which was a lot of fun. And then a couple weeks ago was IT Professionals Day. And so our leadership team actually took breakfast, a box of donuts to all of our local team members, and then we mailed presents like that to our employees. So there's ways to stay engaged in this virtual environment. It just takes a little bit of creativity.
Yeah, and every time I talk about personal connections or engagement with remote teams, I think of that little plastic box that came in the mail, and she's not kidding when she says she shipped marshmallows and graham crackers and little tea lights and a book of matches so that we could all get on a Zoom and have a campfire together. So that little bit of thought went a huge way in making us feel like where we were traditionally always doing things in the office, that we still were able to do that together creatively. And kind of sticking on that theme of connections, we know that teamwork is crucial, but it can be hard to do when we're not in the same place. And, and I kind of talked about this a little bit, Clay, just a second ago, but what are the keys to effective communication and collaboration for the remote teams?
Sure. The thing that I've found to be true over time is that, and it's one of the driving principles at WorkSmart, is that we want to just keep it simple, right? Like make sure that we all know, like there's a gazillion tools. You can't help but be inundated with ads or you hear your neighbor talk about what they use for collaboration, and there's always a shiny new object. For us, the key is to like make sure that we're being as clear as possible about how we're using tools and keeping it pretty simple so that folks know where to go to find their team members when they have technical questions or when they have a question about HR or whatever. And so really keeping it simple really matters. So that's why we focus a lot on using the right technology, not all the technology, right? Because even within Microsoft Teams, even within the Microsoft Office Microsoft 365 world, there's a gazillion tools, right? Whether it's Teams or Yammer or SharePoint, or there's a lot. And so identifying to your team what to use and how to use it, and then being consistent with that really helps.
Yeah, it's, making it clear. We kind of talked about that in our cloud communication webinar, where having the right tools and then communicating the expectations, just like with anything else, is super valuable. And we talked about identifying that right technology stack, because as you said, it's the right technology that fuels, not more technology typically adds complexity.
Well, even when we pick them, even when we say this is where we do it, there's still, even if there's only one road to go on, you can still break down, right? And so there's still pitfalls to avoid, even as you do keep it simple. But having to figure out navigate a one lane highway versus a 4-lane highway with a bunch of traffic on it just makes it a lot easier. And like right now, in the world where information is coming at our people from so many different directions, it's really important to us to give them one place to focus, right? Yeah, so that they aren't losing track and getting distracted. But even in our implementation, we're always trying to get better and making sure that we're centralizing the important stuff, but still allowing for the transactional conversations to happen and figuring out how to disentangle them when they get messed up. So there's still pitfalls to avoid, and it just requires constant attention. And so one of the things that we mentioned last session, 13 weeks ago, the last wrap, was talking about this kind of framework of having a plan, developing the policies, figuring out the right tools, doing the training, and then practicing, and talking about that not as a linear thing with a beginning and an end and then you're done, but at more of a circular process where you go through all that, and when you practice and you figure out something isn't working correctly, going back to reevaluating the plan and starting over or refining, right? And so we're kind of always revisiting or thinking about that.
Yeah, so what are the tech tools that small businesses should be using to simplify working remotely?
Sure. I think for most of us, for years, our number one collaboration tool has been email, right? And whether it's task management or collaboration or just simple back and forth conversations, like everything kind of has gotten lumped into email. And so for us, and I think for most of our clients, they're figuring out that kind of there are actually more appropriate ways to handle different requirements. And so for us, Teams has really become Microsoft Teams has become the hub of that kind of transactional conversation that happens just every time, that happens throughout the day, all the time. It's also become the hub for our collaboration, right? So that when we're working on documents together or spreadsheets or a PowerPoint, we're kind of able to work on that together. We're able to co-edit, co-author, collaborate on all that together. And then for us, we're also, and so Teams is the center of it, but we also use some other Microsoft 365 tools to help us with task management. So we use Planner really throughout the organization to make sure that folks know what they're supposed to be working on and that tasks are assigned with due dates and all those sorts of things. So really kind of for us, it's really, email still has a purpose, right? And largely we're using that for a bunch of external communication at this point, right? But Teams, more and more, we're actually inviting some clients to join our Teams, but Teams is for that transactional kind of day-to-day conversation and for collaboration. And then we use Planner for task management. And those are kind of the big three things for us that we see our clients also adopting. And of course, implementation varies from one place to another, but that's an easy place to start, right? That's cloud-based. It doesn't require heavy infrastructure investment, kind of scales as you grow or don't grow. And most of our folks have access to these tools already because they're using Office or Microsoft 365 for email. And they may or may not know that subscription comes with, in most cases, access to more tools, or is easily upgradable to access all the tools. And so instead of having to worry about multiple sign-ins and all those sorts of things, it's all in one place. And so that's really convenient for our clients too.
Yeah, and there's a theme there that we're all of the things that we've talked about with Teams and the word hub or any of these technology stacks. The goal is to make it easier for people to do their work without having to think about, where and how to do it. Well, maybe how to do it, because we all need to know how to do our job, but we know that engagement is important. So how have you been successful in leading a team and creating this productive environment where people feel bought in?
Can I just turn the question around?
You sure can.
Well, so the interviewer becomes the interviewee. I think the number one, I think I said this at the beginning, you ask them what they want and what they need, and then you kind of try your best to meet them there, right? So like I mentioned earlier, we're kind of constantly seeking feedback on everything from how happy are you at work to do you have all the tools you need at home to feel productive to so kind of a wide variety of questions on that pulsing survey that we send out every 2 weeks, and we take the responses to that really seriously and consider all of the requests or suggestions that come through that way. But we also involve the team in planning, right? So each team kind of helps create their goals for the quarter or the year. And if you don't weigh in, you can't buy in, is what one of my mentors tells me. And so we kind of ask everybody to weigh in. And once your voice is heard, even if the direction doesn't end up in the same way that you might have wanted, you know that you're a part of the conversation. And so by actually wanting and listening to people's opinions, even if they don't win in the end or don't become the final goal, they still know they were heard, right, and respected and all those sorts. And that got really squishy real quick.
Well, I'm sitting over here on the other side thinking, well, 2 years ago, we deployed Tiny Pulse, which is that cloud-based tool that we're using to ask questions, solicit feedback, even recognizing employees It's really done a great job for myself. I've been with the company for 12 years, and if you've joined a webinar before, you might notice I have no problem talking, but the tool has really made me feel welcome in a space where I can provide feedback on things that matter in my day-to-day, even if I hadn't thought of it, because we are using questions, and whether they're balanced on like the psychology of the work environment, or like the tools to actually the practical pieces of getting our jobs done. And so I can attest to that open door, open space feeling. And so we don't get too squishy in this conversation, let's flip it slightly for a minute. What lessons, if any, have you learned about communication and client retention, or basically anything we've learned from our team? What have we learned that we can apply to client retention and keeping happy clients?
Sure. Well, I think the theme of this thing is kind of like is authenticity, right? Like you have to like kind of say what you mean and mean what you say, and do that in a way that is as personal as possible, right? As personal both as you feel however comfortable you are, it also lends itself to whether or not it's authentic. And so luckily at WorkSmart, we have a bunch of folks who really enjoy and value personal relationships. And so we believe that's one of the things that we look for when we're hiring. And so that just comes through. It's inevitable for that to be a part of every interaction with every client, is that they care about them personally. And, obviously that's a little bit different for different folks, but, and so when you care about that and you're authentic, then you can have conversations with clients, and coworkers that are meaningful without kind of an outcome in mind. Right. And so, if you're really just kind of working to help, or listening or communicating with the outcome in mind of having our clients and our people reach their full potential, then and that actually is what happens, right? Because you aren't trying to force a square peg in a round hole. You have a bunch of people who care. And so in remote work times, it's like, if we can, let's do video. If we can look each other in the eye, or if you get on the phone and you're like, I just can't do a video call today. You meet them where they are. Some people, me personally, by 2 o'clock, I'm done with video calls. And so if I have meetings scheduled, they're just going to be on the phone, right? Because
for today.
Except for today. That's right. Except for today. 3 o'clock then. You meet people where they are. Sometimes we've had in-face meetings with clients in the past couple months because they're like, we need to see you, right? And so we do it in a smart way, or as socially distanced as possible. But always fighting to maintain that personal connection and utilizing technology when appropriate and knowing when to avoid it. And that's a personal judgment, are all part of it.
And the cool thing about the tools that we've talked about throughout, the remote office series and this Back to the Future series, because they're all based in the cloud, you can configure those to incorporate guests like client and vendors. So if the technology is valuable in that moment, some of these tools we are talking about make it just as easy to connect and stay engaged with whomever, if they're external to the company. Kind of shifting a little bit more into the technology piece, having seen systems deployed across all types of small businesses, what do you think the biggest value of the cloud is?
So we certainly over the last few months have had a really significant uptick in the number of clients who are moving from like on-premise servers into like Azure or cloud services and things like that. And so I'm not going to list one, but there's a handful, right? There's just sheer like utility style billing, right? Which a lot of our clients are looking for. A lot of people think that it's just maybe I'll save some money and move to the cloud. Like that may or may not be true. Like we certainly don't say you're gonna. We can't promise that you'll save money in moving to the cloud, but we can promise that you'll normally pay for what you use, right? And so that utility style billing is really attractive to folks, especially when there's uncertainty, right? Like What's going to happen with COVID over the next 6 months, kind of don't know what kind of economic impacts did the election have, don't know. There's all sorts of just uncertainty especially in the near term. And so if I need to scale up or scale down my business, having that ability is really important to a lot of folks right now. Second thing is like is that it's highly available, right? And so most clouds are the cloud generally is highly redundant and threat resistant, right? So it's less likely to be affected by one storm or something like that. Doesn't mean it never has outages, but it's probably more, it is definitely more resilient than the server in your office, right? And then also, very, very few of our clients are kind of building their own cloud. We're using public cloud infrastructure. Most of our clients are Microsoft clients. And so not only are you buying the RAM and the storage or the email storage or those sorts of things, you're also buying their team that's working night and day to keep it secure. So those are the three things that I would say are kind of like the biggest drivers for that decision for our small business clients. Utility style billing, it's highly available, and they've got a lot more people working on security than our clients normally do on their teams, right? And so security is a big one as well.
And you said it, we have a lot of clients that adopted the cloud pretty quickly. That's being felt probably all across the world, not just our small business clients. And even back in our, again, 13 weeks ago in our Back to the Future episode, we talked about being highly critical of the setup to continue to look for improvements. And you even said it a little bit earlier in one of the questions I asked you about continually improving. So if you were to list a few, or actually, could you list a few easy wins for small business moving to the cloud?
Easy wins, sure. I think, I don't know the exact percentage, but the majority of our clients have already moved their email into the cloud. But if you haven't, that's an easy kind of first step, right? We recommend Microsoft 365. Another easy win is disaster recovery into the cloud, so that if you still have on-premise servers or data, that's an easy way to kind of utilize the cloud to see your backups replicated offsite. We're also, but those are things that we've been talking about for a really long time. So now we're seeing clients rethink the way that they're managing their users, right? So for a long time, many of our small business clients were hesitant to move their last server to the cloud. Maybe they had an email server and that went to Office 365, and they had an application, they had a server that helped them with QuickBooks, and they started using QuickBooks Online or whatever. But the thing that the last vestiges, the things that we were clinging on to on premise were user management through Active Directory and file storage, right? And so over the last year, we've seen clients move both of those things into the cloud as those services have matured. So Dawn mentioned, I think earlier, Azure Active Directory. So we have clients who are eliminating their need for a local or an on-premise Active Directory infrastructure to manage users and permissions and those sorts of things. And we have even more clients moving their file storage up into some people are using Teams for shared content. Some people are using OneDrive for personal content. And there's lots of different strategies. It's not that important which one you choose, but that you have a clear idea of how you want to use it, as I said earlier. But those two things are really popular right now to get moving to the cloud.
In fact, we did a webinar episode, another shameless plug, called Files Everywhere, in which we talked about the different Microsoft 365 solutions that are that help you with file sharing and file storage, depending on whether you're working individually or as a team. And that has come a long way in the last even just 5 years, what the offerings that Microsoft has had. So I definitely echo that piece of moving away from the traditional on-premise file storage solution. And you said something about that kind of sparked this idea of we're moving towards an infrastructure that has a zero footprint in the office, in a traditional office setting. And by being cloud-centric, we're increasing the number of potential entry points where we are exposing ourselves on the internet to potential, cyber threats. So Brian Craig joined us to talk about a couple weeks back to stress the importance of what you were saying here, this principle of secure access and making sure it applies to the cloud applications as much as it does on site. So in addition to that, what other advice do you have for businesses to protect their data as that mobility increases?
Sure. I'm just 2 points before I answer the question. One, I think you started out by talking about like no footprint in the traditional office. And I think, one of the things that's uncertain, I think, about the next, 18 months is like, what even is a traditional office anymore? So like, we might not have a choice as to whether or not we have a footprint in an office. Almost fell off my chair. Excuse me. And the other thing, and I'm sure Brian covered this in virtual reality, but for folks who are with us today, you want to make sure you have secure access. And the one thing that I'd make sure all of our clients and people who are attending today are thinking about is multi-factor authentication, right? It's just a huge, it's kind of got a bit of a stigma that it's kind of a pain to manage or implement, but it is the best thing that you can do, especially as you're moving to the cloud, to make sure that your users aren't, their users' identities and passwords haven't been used to kind of do bad things with your information or your data. So multi-factor authentication, I'm sure that's covered in that virtual reality episode, but just wanted to reiterate the point here. But then the last thing to answer your question, aside from the security stuff, I think people forget pretty easily that once they go to the cloud, they still need a backup strategy, right? We think that when it's there, I mentioned earlier, the cloud's resilient. It's less likely to have an outage and all those sorts of things. It doesn't prevent user error. It doesn't mean no bad things happen. So you want the ability to recover. And so moving to the cloud isn't just like, let's get rid of it and then we can forget about backups. Moving to the cloud just means we need to include backup planning as part of that cloud strategy.
Might look a little different than we were normally seeing with an on-premise infrastructure. But speaking about bad things happening, data breaches cost approximately $1 trillion a year. Well, I should say trillions of dollars a year. Isn't that nice? Like approximately trillions. Half of cyber attacks target small businesses. So as a small business owner, what are your biggest fears when it comes to cybersecurity?
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot of fears around cybersecurity.
Just the top ones,
The top ones.
You could spend a whole hour talking about all of them, but
that's right. So I'd say the thing that strikes me now as we're kind of our work patterns have changed are two things. One, a lot of our strategy around cybersecurity, especially when it came to working in the office, was that we had some physical security happening, right? We had a firewall, we had locks on the doors, we had all those sorts of things. We don't have the same business class firewall installed at every user's home to kind of keep out bad guys. And so they're a little bit more susceptible. So that's one thing. And it also kind of goes into the second point, which is that people's work habits are changing. And so like the way that they used to interact with teammates is different. They're a little bit more used to interacting kind of purely digitally and not confirming things in person. And so as those behaviors change, bad guys like to take advantage of variables, right? And so as things are changing, bad guys like to take advantage of it. So those are two things, right? We have less kind of control over the environment in which our users are working, and they're just more susceptible because they're still getting used to what's normal now. Does that make sense?
It does, and it actually provokes me to ask, what do you think is the number one thing that we can do to protect ourselves, especially in a climate where more people are trying to take advantage of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we talked about in our wrap up 13 weeks ago, right? You have to have a good plan. In order to have a good plan, you have to identify risks and all those sorts of things. And that takes conversation, right? I can be prescriptive and say like, everybody should do X, Y, and Z, but it might not be exactly right for every organization. But have a good plan, and a good plan requires collaboration with vendors and your teammates and all those sorts of things. Once you have a plan, make sure you put the policies in place to support it, that you don't just throw a tool on it, right? A lot of folks kind of skip that policy section of saying like, here's how we're going to run it. Here's what's going to happen when bad things happen. So have a plan, develop policies, implement tools. And a lot of people stop at tools, but you got to also make sure that you train people so that they know what to expect, so that there aren't a bunch of surprises or things that get ignored that shouldn't be. And then you just have to keep practicing, and that practice includes revisiting the plan. And so that's, when it comes to security, you really have to be thoughtful about it and think about it. That being said, there's a lot of as the workplace kind of changes over time, we are also encouraging folks to not only think about preventative tools, but think about monitoring tools, right? So that we not only put everything in place to prevent the bad things, but when the bad things happen, we want to make sure that we know. And so we not only want to prevent, but we want to detect when it does happen, right? And so I think that was part of another webinar that we did, right?
Weird enough, yes.
And so that's also an important part. In terms of training, we also talk about making sure users, I think the last webinar we did was about phishing and making sure that users aren't as susceptible to being tricked by a bad guy. And I know that there's kind of sometimes a little bit of a bad connotation with the phishing thing, right? Like it feels a little mean to kind of try to trick your users, but like it's really the best way to kind of help them build that muscle memory of recognizing and responding to when someone's trying to take their information. And so all those are just like parts of what a good plan can look like, right? But like just thinking about a plan, creating policies, putting in the right tools, training folks as appropriate, and then practicing it and making changes to the plan as necessary is really what I would say your game plan is to protect yourself.
Yeah, we talked a lot about on a couple of episodes how users are just naturally your number one risk because of the way they work with your data. They have access, they have legitimate access into your systems. They probably have, depending on the type of work they do for you, will lend itself to what data they have access to. And so as an employee, it's important to be aware of what those risks are. And so you talk about you mentioned security awareness training, and then you talked about simulated phishing attacks. And so I just want to reiterate that those simulated phishing attacks, although they do seem deceptive when sending them, they are critical in making that reflexive behavior so that there's a culture of awareness. You also said something about monitoring, and there's been a lot of buzz around machine learning and artificial intelligence and how that's going to help increase protection for small businesses at an affordable cost. So, if folks are listening, if you've heard endpoint detection, managed detection response, SOC as a service, why, Clay, is cyber threat monitoring detection more important now than ever before?
Well, it's some of the things I've already said, right? The bad guys know that people's work habits are changing, so they're going to be taking advantage of that. Bad guys know that folks are using cloud services more now than ever, and so they're looking for every opportunity that they can. I don't remember the exact stat, but it's something like when bad guys get into your systems, they typically are going to lurk for like 60 to 90 days, kind of gathering information before they even do anything nefarious, right? And so as the bad guys mature and get better, they become more capable of taking credentials. Our users are a little bit more susceptible because the world is changing around them quickly. And because there's a lot of small businesses out there, and they know that small businesses don't normally have the same kind of security infrastructure as bigger businesses. That's why. That's why it's a bigger threat to us now more than ever. You know, when I talk about small businesses and their investment in IT security, far too many of us kind of think that a firewall and antivirus are still enough, right? Like, we have a good firewall and we have antivirus on all our machines, and even we have security awareness training. And those are a good start, but those are kind of table stakes today due to the kind of complexity and aggressive nature of the bad guys. And I hate to I really don't like to do like the fear, uncertainty, and doubt thing, but it's just true. And so the detect and the monitor and detection stuff relies on machine learning and artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff because the threat isn't defined. And so if you think of like a traditional firewall and antivirus, it has a bunch of definitions of bad things. I'm using my hands a lot. I just became self-conscious. There's a bunch of definitions of what the bad things are, and firewall and antivirus are really good at preventing those, right? Because there's a definition, it sees something that it scans everything, and if it hits the definition list, it takes care of it. Bad guys are smarter than that, and they're always, the bad guys are always ahead of the good guys. And so vendors use machine learning to say, what does a bad action look like, right? What if there was something bad on a machine, what do we think it would be doing? So it uses that knowledge to be preventative, right? To say like, hey, this application that you just downloaded from this website that doesn't have a good reputation, that we've never heard of before, is doing something that looks like a virus or encrypting data or a ransomware kind of attack. And so we're just going to go ahead and kill that, right? That bad piece of software might never have been seen before. And so a traditional antivirus would never catch it because it's not in that definition list. But because the tools that we can use now are looking at the behavior, they catch it before it does its damage. Similarly, we also want to monitor user behavior, right? Not just like application behavior on your computer, but also user behavior. So if Sally in accounting always logs in from Roxborough Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, but all of a sudden she's in, the Ukraine or any other country and it's 2 a.m., we have a team member for Ukraine. So if he watches this, I don't want him to think that we're bad guys are. So she logs in at 2 a.m. from somewhere else. Like, that's a weird thing, right? It's out of the normal. And so we might want to, if Sally is in accounting and she has access to bank accounts, all those sorts of things, we might want to be really severe in our reaction to that and immediately block her access because it's so abnormal. Whereas that activity might be completely normal for someone else. So we actually want a smart alerting system that is not only, or a smart monitoring and detection system that not only looks at applications, but also looks at user behavior. Because Sally logging in from the Ukraine at 2 a.m. might be an indication that her credentials were hacked. And so that person could be logging in and not doing anything, but just sitting there kind of reading Sally's emails. And they might do that for a month until they understand how she talks and who she communicates with about payroll and on when payroll runs and all those sorts of things. So, man, that felt like a long answer to a short question.
All valuable points.
That's why it's important. That's why it's important for us to be monitoring and monitoring for security, not just hoping our firewall and antivirus do the job.
Absolutely. We have to know that there's a problem so that we can use that plan that we talked about having to respond and recover quickly. I'm going to cheat on this last question. Cybersecurity is going to remain a priority, and we're a couple days away from a very spooky month, not just because it's the month of Halloween. Hint again at what's to come in October. But what, if you were going to give us a wrap up of what small businesses can do to stay protected, what are those things?
Sure. I think you have to just make sure that you're talking to your team about it, right? So that's the one thing. Just make it part of the culture. A lot of us have the tendency to avoid talking about things that could go wrong or that are scary or things like that. So we just want to make sure that, first of all, it's brought up, right? Even if you don't have security awareness training or anything like that, kind of regularly talking about the fact that bad guys out there will try to phish you helps, right? Second thing is put together a plan that has multiple layers, right? You want to be really thoughtful about where your risks are. So where are people working from? How do they connect to your data? Do we have multi-factor? All the things we talked about. We want multiple layers of security that exist to protect the organization's data and your users from all the bad guys out there. And of course, like, just got to put a plug in somewhere. We're happy to help, right? Our team can help you build a security plan that will work for your organization. We recognize that there's no one silver bullet to solve it, right? But that all organizations are a little bit different. We have some common tools that we use, but how we implement them can be different from one client to another. And we're always happy to help. So even if it's not us, find an expert who knows what they're talking about to help you make that plan come to life.
Yes. So thank you, Clay. It's 2:49. So I don't have any more questions for you, but Dawn, do we have any questions from folks watching?
So we had one really good comment that I wanted to share. And while I share that, all of you can type furiously with your remaining questions. Clay loves all the random questions. I think those are the ones he might enjoy the most from our staff meetings. So feel free to ask away.
Ask him who he's starting in his fantasy football lineup.
Yeah. Or his favorite ice cream. But in all seriousness, we had a comment from the office that said, or from the audience that said that the security awareness training that we've been providing and the phishing stuff that we've been talking about has really helped stop some bad behavior with their team members in their office. So not to be a dead horse, but like it's a thing that's really valuable for small businesses, and even internally, we get phish tested all the time here at WorkSmart. So it's this, like Clay said, it's a muscle that you have to keep exercising. So, and then on top of that, like just to wrap up some other like key threads or takeaways that we've talked about really throughout this whole series, and then today that Clay kind of hammered on, is the importance of picking the right toolkit for you and your office and for how your team works, whether that's for communicating in the cloud and doing more outside of email, and what that looks like for you and your team. And we have some really good resources to help you figure that out. Or file storage, whether you're going to do that within Teams or in a different way. And again, we have some really good stuff to help you there. And then cybersecurity as well. What's the how do you stay safe with how your team is working? And then the last thing that goes through all of that is the communication to your team members. And making sure that they know what's expected and how to work efficiently and how to stay safe and how to stay connected as people and a well-functioning team. So with that, I don't see any more questions coming in to the queue. But if you have them, we have a couple minutes left.
I'll just say my fantasy football team lost by 60 points and my favorite ice cream is Oreo.
There we go. That's what we all really wanted to know. It's true. You're just going to get a delivery to the office tomorrow of like,
fantasy football points.
Cool. Alrighty. Well, that's a wrap, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this whole series. I hope it was helpful for you. I hope you've gotten some really good stuff here and there in all the different episodes, and then especially today. Thank you so much to both of you, Marissa and Clay, for joining us and providing your amazing insight. So what's coming up next?
You'll find out on October 1st.
Yes. So we're actually going to take a little bit of a break from live events, which is crazy because we've been doing them weekly since March. But we have some really exciting new stuff coming up. I won't give too much away because we are going to send a really cool announcement email. So watch your inbox next week on October 1st. But as Marissa mentioned, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And it's also Halloween. So we're going to do some really fun stuff to teach you all about cybersecurity and make it fun, and talk about the scary threats of cybersecurity and the wicked witches of the web, and how to stay safe and protected with your counter curses. And Clay is shaking his head. You should be used to our crazy friends at this point, right? I feel like that's a thing that you know about us.
We're funny.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So keep an eye on your inbox. There's going to be contests and ways to stay connected with us throughout this whole series, and some other kind of fun things. So, and as always, great information, because that's the point. So with that, that's a wrap, everyone. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.